I would now like to hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Greg Drummond, who will now take us through some of the concepts around incident and emergency management decision-making and why they are so important. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Sandra. So just as a bit of an outline for today's workshop, we've been through the introductions, but really importantly, the background and the need for this project. So it did originate from an NHRA project grant, and it's been worked on. So within the team of practitioners and researchers that we've had working on this, I'm the only non-psychologist. So we've got psychologists, and we started off working within Australia, and it very quickly spread over to the UK as well. But we've got some really heavy hitters in the industry that have provided sort of the foundational support and background for this project. We've got Chris and Peter that we have online here today with us. We've also got Jim McLennan, who's got a fundamental wealth of research in this space going back decades across emergency services. Across into the UK, we have Rona Flynn, who's one of the leading psychologists in the space and has been for many, many years. We also have, and mine's gone, Phil Butler, as well, who's not only a psychologist in his own right and has worked in a number of critical areas there, but is also, like myself, a firefighter veteran and has worked in that space. My background is as a paid paramedic initially straight out of high school, and then moving into the fire and emergency services, first in WA and now in New South Wales, and looking at it from that space. So with that research background from the NHRA beginnings, it did move across now into a more developed AFAC project. So with the AFAC project, what we're looking to do and what we're looking to establish is really distill the tens of thousands of research outputs that have been provided globally, and really make sure that we can sort of get the best out of all of them, simplify them, look at the differences between the different approaches, and really provide a really fundamental model and sort of theory background for all Australian and New Zealand emergency services, regardless of hazard, regardless of service, with that, and really provide the guidance around the best practice. With this as well, what we're going to be presenting to you today is once it is finished, it'll be immediately implementable across all fire and emergency services in Australia and New Zealand. It's designed to complement existing systems, so to complement aims, complement the existing approaches. But we've taken an approach whereby what you'll see is not just the model itself, but how it can fit directly into doctrine. So we've already written the work so it can fit into doctrine. It's directly applicable straight into the training environment, and that's something which at Fire and Rescue New South Wales, my background is in the education and training directorate. So I understand how it needs to plug directly into our existing programs at no cost. And with that, we've been fortunate in working with AFAC, working with NHRA, so that everything that we're providing will actually be available under Creative Commons license. So that will be free for all fire and emergency services, personnel and organisations in Australia and New Zealand. Really importantly, our collective research has identified that some of the greatest risks to the organisations is the reviews, the criticisms after these catastrophic and very low frequency jobs and incidents. With those, because there's a lot of common language, but not commonality or the same language across services, and even amongst incident controllers and teams within the same service, this creates a risk for services as departments and as agencies. One of the things that this project will enable us to do is actually de-risk that quite significantly, because it can provide a common standardized approach that allows that true interoperability across services in the most complex and extreme of circumstances. So that's a bit of a background in terms of the model and the information that we'll be providing. And with that, I'll hand over to Chris.
Great, thank you, Greg. So the incident and emergency management decision model, it really does pull together a lot of different strands of research, and it is designed to be a broad model of how decision making works. And really what it does is that it potentially allows people to understand where their decision-making training is placed in terms of that model of decision-making, so that we can potentially supplement bits that aren't being covered. So it does try to provide that integrated account of decision making. It does build on that just decades and decades of research, particularly in the cognitive science, and also the underlying activity theory. Activity theory is interesting because it actually underpins a lot of human factors, although it's not necessarily acknowledged as such. And the model that we've come to here is based on that activity theory flow, but it also encompasses a couple of other key models of decision making. So it's largely based on the model of expert decision making in air traffic control proposed by Don Giles and myself, and also the SPA model of decision making, which was proposed by David Launder and Greg Drummond. So those are the really two foundational models that underpin this theory, but also it encompasses some of the latest research on dual pathway decision models. So it's really bringing together a lot of stuff. Decision making is one of the fundamental non-technical skills. Situation awareness is often distinguished from decision making, and it is here for the sake of convenience. But really, a lot of the contemporary models and the model that we're going to talk about today actually includes situation awareness as a part of that decision model. Really, we can think of situation awareness as the front end of decision making. But of course, decision making is fundamentally underpinned by good cooperation, which is about how people work together, communication, which is about who says what to who and when they do that, and also coordination, which is about the intersynchronization of behaviors so that we can actually have a team performance. And then underlying that is how we manage our stress and fatigue, and also the leadership of those teams. And they all interconnect in fundamental ways. So when we think about decision making, we also need to think about the wider context in terms of its place in the non-technical skills framework. So this is the model then. It's based on that activity theory notion of situation awareness, goals, plans, actions, and review. And it has those basic characteristics of intuitive and analytical. So we can either go through those processes intuitively or we can do that analytically. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of those processes. So firstly, the orientation process then. Orientation is about the development of our situation awareness in the context of things that we already know. So what happens is that there's all the knowledge, all the experience that we have is encapsulated in mental models, which are basically structures that sit largely in our long-term memory. Now, when we're walking around the world, we use those mental models to interpret our situation so that therefore we know how to act. Now, what the theory suggests is that when we come to a situation, we use those mental models to create default values. So our initial situation awareness is based on our expectations of which is formed from what we've seen before. Now, what we need to do is to update that using information from the world. And that's more of an analytical process. So we start that situation awareness intuitively, and then it's supplemented with the analytical pathways. Situation awareness is the result of that orientation process, and we can capture that with three fundamental questions. What's happening now? What has happened in the recent past? And what will happen in the future? Once we have an understanding of that, that's our situation model, that's our situation awareness. But of course, we also need to be able to predict what might go wrong. So a fourth question, if you like, which supplements the key three things, is that, well, okay, I have an understanding of what's happening now, what could happen in the future, what could go wrong here. And that's also important to build into our situation awareness. Now, situation awareness is based on our own understanding of the world. It's based on our own experience, our knowledge, our values, all the things that we know. So by its very nature, situation awareness is individual. And because of that, it's going to have bugs in it. It's going to be individual. We're going to have blind spots. And the other thing to remember about situation awareness is that it's only ever a subset of things that are out there in the environment. So because it's about our own individual perspective, that fundamentally limits where we can see our information. And once we commit to a goal, our goal actually drives our situation awareness. It's what's called crossing the Rubicon. That's not our language. That's a theory of decision making. But the idea is that once we've committed to that goal, that fundamentally changes how we perceive our environment. And so the goal basically dictates where we're looking for our cues. And there's quite good evidence now that even really obvious things in the environment can be missed if they're not consistent with our goals. So in terms of the goals, plans, and actions then, we've separated goals, plans, and actions here, although in reality, they're actually quite closely related. And the idea is that as we get more specific, the goals turn into plans. And as the plans get more specific, they turn into actions. So what we see then is that kind of connected sequence of behaviors. But for our purposes and for the convenience of presentation, we can call them separate things. Now, when we talk about goals, what we're really talking about is the kind of the high level things that specify what we want to achieve. And committing to a goal is really important because that turns our wishes or our wants into actionable things. It serves to focus our attention and our concentration. So that's one of the ways in which that starts to limit our situation awareness, and then it primes our plans. Plans, they essentially specify goals in behavioral terms, so they outline how we achieve goals. They typically articulate a sequence of steps. For people who are less experienced, then they're going to need more detailed plans, whereas experts actually may only have a very loose plan, which essentially has a number of actions embedded within it. So plans for experts and novices are actually quite different. The plans need to be able to meet all of the relevant goals. So in a planned burn setting, for example, we may have a number of goals that we want to achieve. Those could be the efficiency of the burn. So we want a really efficient burn that burns out all the material that we want to get rid of. Another goal might be the safety of the crew. We may have environmental concerns. We don't want to negatively impact people with health concerns, things like asthma. And then also maybe culturally sensitive things that we don't want to burn as well. So our goals in that sense are a combination of efficiency, safety, environmental concerns, cultural concerns. And the plan that we pick needs to meet those goals. And typically what we find is that one of those goals acts as the driver of behavior, which is often efficiency. So efficiency typically drives behavior, but we need to meet those other goals to a minimum standard or threshold. So the plan that we pick basically implements each of those goals or that goal set that we talk about. And it needs to meet them all to a relevant threshold. So the plan that we pick, it has to be efficient, but it also, in some senses, we kind of sacrifice some of the efficiency in order to make sure that it's safe for the crews and that it's not going to negatively impact people's grapes, for example. And plans also organize and regulate actions. So plans specify into the actions that we're going to carry out to achieve those plans and goals. And actions, they implement the plans. They can be triggered by cues in the environment, so we don't have to carry out an action straight away. We can embed that in the environment that we're working in. So we can say things like, well, okay, if the fire gets to the river by 5 o'clock, then we're not going to be able to hold it, so we're going to have to withdraw to another control line. So we can embed actions in the environment. And those actions need to be sequenced. Often we have lots of actions, and we need to sequence those appropriately. Now, one of the really important parts of this model is the review process. Because we're going through those sequences either intuitively or analytically. So when we have our situation awareness, it primes our goals, plans, and actions, and we're updating those based on our analytical processes, our more conscious, our more deliberate knowledge. In order to do that effectively, we need to have this review process, which can be based on either feedback or feed forward. Feedback essentially provides information regarding how far we've progressed towards our goal or plan attainment. And that feedback is out there in the environment. We can look for that as a way of validating our situation awareness and the fact that our actions are meeting our plans and goals. Feed forward, by contrast, is essentially where we anticipate what the system's going to look like in the future. And then we can anticipate potential problems. We can ensure that our situation awareness is correct. Or when we get to that situation, we can then match it to what we imagined was going to happen. And we can develop an understanding at that point. So feed forward then basically is this anticipatory control mechanism, and it uses our understanding and knowledge of how the system performs in order to project future outcomes. Feedback and feed forward are really important parts of that review process. That's essentially how the process works. And it checks that actions are achieving our plans and goals, and it validates our situation awareness. As I said earlier, we often build that initial situation awareness based on our expectations. And so we need to validate that, because situation awareness is the most crucial part of this process. Because if we get that bit wrong, then the goals, plans, and actions that we carry out are not going to achieve what we want it to. Essentially, what we do is that we're solving the wrong problem. And if the situation changes, which often happens in our dynamic environments, and we don't detect that, we're going to be making errors. And finally, review is also the basis for learning and performance improvement. It allows us to reflect on our performance and to see how we can do that better. Now, the review process often takes cognitive resources, and it can be one of those aspects of the model that can drop out if we're busy doing other things. So it's a really important part of decision making, but often something that can cause us a problem. We talked a bit about this intuitive and analytical pathway through the model. Intuitive is this fast and instinctive decision making. It's based on pattern recognition. We can also use emotions and heuristics. Heuristics are essentially mental shortcuts. And what they do is that they allow us to act in efficient ways in complex environments. They'll give us an answer, but not necessarily the best answer. Intuitive decision making operates at this subconscious level, so we're not necessarily aware of the processes that are being carried out. And it operates all the time. So this is our default way of making decisions. So when we experience a situation, we recognize that as familiar, and we can very quickly move to actions. So we can populate the goals, plans, and actions with default values. And then the analytical process, which is our more deliberate and conscious process, supplements that intuitive decision making. It updates it. So in our plan burn scenario, for example, we may recognize the fact that we've done these plan burns hundreds of times in the past. We go, okay, I know what goals I want to achieve. I know what the plans are to achieve those goals, and I know the actions that are going to achieve those plans. But the problem is that if a situation isn't quite what we think it is, we can miss goals and we can miss plans. So in our plan burn scenario, we can go, okay, I've seen this before. We want an efficient burn. I'm thinking about crew safety. I'm thinking about my environmental considerations. Great. Okay. Here's the plans that are going to carry that out. Here are the actions. But if we don't stop and reflect using our analytical pathway, we can miss goals. So in that scenario, we've missed the culturally sensitive stuff. So we've achieved goals that we've achieved in the past, but we've missed something because that's different to the normal scenario that we run with. Analytical decision making, often it's often assumed that we can be fully analytical all the time. And that decision making should always be fully conscious, fully deliberate, and we should think about everything. But unfortunately, we don't have the cognitive resources to be able to do that. And it's also very time consuming to go through each of these stages analytical. So the hallmark of genuine expertise is to be able to use these intuitive systems, which are running in the background all the time anyway, and to be able to effectively supplement that using these slower, more deliberate processes. And that gives us the opportunity for more accurate sense making, that situation awareness process, options analysis, risk assessment, and planning. And also it allows us to do that effective review more deliberately and then do that more effectively. So that's the model in a nutshell.